The massive viewing chamber of Nexus Prime Station stretched out like a metallic cathedral, its walls lined with observation decks that housed representatives from 12 different species. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime, as alien voices mixed together in a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonics that would have driven a human mad without proper filtering. Admiral Park Min-ho adjusted his uniform collar and tried not to let his frustration show. He had been sitting in the human delegation section for 3 hours now, watching holographic displays that showcased the military might of every species except his own. The Veltar Empire's sleek destroyers moved like silver daggers through space simulations. The Crystalline Collective's ships looked more like floating geometric art pieces, their translucent hulls refracting light into rainbow patterns that somehow housed devastating energy weapons. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering that made even the most advanced human structures look primitive. Gravity fields allowed delegates to sit on walls and ceilings according to their species' preferences. Some floated in bubbles of methane gas, while others basked under heat lamps that would have melted human skin in seconds. The central holographic projector was the size of a small building, creating three-dimensional fleet displays so realistic that Park could see individual weapon turrets rotating on ships that existed light years away. Ambassador Velthar finally stood up from his crystalline throne, which seemed to grow from the floor like a living thing. His body was completely see-through, except for the flowing robes that somehow stayed solid around his form. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, though the translator made his words sharp and businesslike. "We have reviewed the applications from 17 species seeking military partnership status this cycle," Velthar announced. "Most have been approved for various levels of cooperation. However, we must now address the humans' request for full military membership in the Galactic Defense Coalition." The chamber's background chatter died down as attention focused on the central display. Park felt dozens of alien eyes turning toward him, some with genuine curiosity, but most with barely concealed amusement. He had expected this moment and steeled himself for what was coming. The holographic display flickered to life, showing footage that had been gathered by Coalition intelligence ships observing human fleet exercises near Jupiter. Park recognized the vessels immediately, older destroyers and cruisers that represented humanity's current deep space capability. To alien eyes, they must have looked like something hammered together in a scrapyard. General Korthak of the Flame Empire was the first to react, his reptilian form uncoiled from what looked like a heated rock platform, his scales shifting from orange to bright red as his internal temperature rose with excitement. "Behold the mighty human warfleet," he hissed, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "I have seen cargo haulers with more impressive weapon arrays." The display zoomed in on the UES Roosevelt, one of humanity's newest heavy cruisers. Park had served on her sister ship during the Titan mining conflicts, and he knew every rivet and weld line on her hull. But seeing her through alien eyes, he understood their reaction. Where other species built smooth, flowing ships that looked like living creatures or geometric crystals, human vessels were angular blocks of metal covered in obvious armor plating. External weapon mounts jutted out at seemingly random angles. Sensor arrays and communication dishes created a cluttered silhouette that looked more like a city skyline than a sleek warship. Commander Zilfora of the Void Seekers laughed, a sound like static electricity crackling through metal. Her species existed partially in normal space and partially in some dimension humans couldn't even detect, giving her a ghostly appearance that shifted between solid and transparent. "Their propulsion systems are chemical rockets with fusion boosters. My personal shuttle could outrun their fastest destroyer." "The armor is particularly amusing," added Director Kethmore of the Machine Worlds, his cybernetic implants glowing as he processed the tactical data. Layered metal plates welded together like ancient ocean vessels. A single plasma lance could cut through that hull like it was made of paper. Ambassador Velthar gestured, and the display switched to a comparison chart showing weapon capabilities. Human kinetic weapons, essentially very large guns that fired metal projectiles, were listed alongside the energy weapons, plasma cannons, and dimensional rupture devices used by coalition forces. The human weapons looked pathetic by comparison, their damage output measured in megatons, while alien weapons were rated in planet-killing potential. Park's hand moved unconsciously to his jacket pocket, where a sealed message waited. The authorization. Codes inside would change everything. These aliens thought they knew about human military capability, but he wasn't ready to reveal that card yet. Let them underestimate humanity. It would make the eventual revelation all the more satisfying. The mockery continued for another 20 minutes, as various delegates pointed out the obvious flaws in human naval design. Their ships were too slow, too heavily built, too dependent on primitive technologies that had been abandoned by civilized species millennia ago. What none of them understood was that human ships were built according to a philosophy that no other species had ever needed to develop. The idea that sometimes you had to keep fighting even when everything went wrong. 3 months had passed since the humiliating display at Nexus Prime, and the galaxy had almost forgotten about humanity's failed application for military membership. Then the emergency alerts started flooding every communication channel across Coalition space, turning routine patrol missions into desperate calls for help. Captain Lee Sujin was reviewing supply manifests aboard her flagship when the first distress signal reached her. The Coalition destroyer Starfall was patrolling the Outer Rim territories, her mixed crew of humans and aliens going about their daily routines in the peaceful void between star systems. The ship itself was a marvel of alien engineering, sleek curves of crystalline metal that seemed to flow like liquid, powered by energy cores that could have lit up entire cities back on Earth. Captain, we're receiving multiple emergency transmissions from the Kepler sector, reported Lieutenant Cho Min-soo from the communication station. His human eyes were wide with disbelief as he processed the incoming data. Entire colonies are going dark. Ships are disappearing from sensor grids. The main display screen flickered to life, showing a tactical map of Coalition space. Red warning indicators were appearing faster than the computer could process them, each one representing a lost colony, a destroyed space station, or a fleet that had simply vanished without a trace. Whatever was causing this devastation was moving through populated systems like a plague. Then the first visual confirmation arrived, transmitted by a Coalition scout ship in its final moments before being destroyed. The footage showed something that had haunted alien nightmares for centuries. Geometric shapes that seemed to bend light around themselves, ships that looked more like mathematical equations than physical objects. The Devourers had returned. After 50 years of silence, Lee Sujin had heard stories about these machine intelligences from older Coalition officers, tales that were usually told in whispers over drinks in station bars. The Devourers didn't just destroy civilizations, they consumed them, breaking down matter at the molecular level and incorporating it into their ever-growing fleet. They were adaptive learning machines that could analyze any weapon used against them and develop countermeasures within hours. Set course for the Kepler sector, maximum speed, she ordered. Send word to all Coalition fleets. We have a category, 5 extinction event in progress. The Starfall jumped to hyperspace, along with 12 other Coalition vessels, forming the first response fleet. As they traveled through the twisted dimensions of faster-than-light space, more reports continued to arrive. The Devourers weren't just attacking random targets. They were systematically dismantling the Coalition's outer defenses, consuming resources and technology to make themselves stronger. When the fleet dropped back into normal space near Kepler station, the sight that greeted them was like something from a cosmic horror story. 3 massive Devourer ships hung in space like geometric nightmares, their surfaces covered in flowing patterns that hurt to look at directly. They were feeding on the remains of what had once been a thriving mining colony, breaking down asteroids and space stations alike into streams of raw materials that flowed into their hulls. All weapons, focus fire on the lead vessel, Captain Lee ordered, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her chest. She had trained for this moment her entire career, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of facing an enemy that had consumed entire star systems. The Coalition fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma beams hot enough to melt planets struck the lead Devourer ship, followed by particle cannons that could punch holes through moon-sized asteroids. Energy weapons that represented the pinnacle of alien technology poured destruction into the enemy vessel at rates that should have vaporized any known material. Instead, the Devourer ship began to glow brighter as it absorbed every joule of energy directed at it. The flowing patterns on its hull shifted and changed, adapting to the incoming fire in real time. Within minutes, what had been a kilometer-long geometric shape had grown to twice its original size, powered by the very weapons meant to destroy it. "Impossible," whispered Commander Velkoth from his position at the tactical station. His crystalline form flickered with stress patterns as he watched his sensors confirm what his eyes were seeing. "It's not just deflecting our weapons, it's feeding on them." The other coalition ships tried different approaches. Some switched to kinetic weapons, firing solid projectiles at relativistic speeds. The Devourers adapted, developing energy fields that slowed the projectiles to harmless velocities before absorbing them. Others attempted electronic warfare, trying to disrupt the machine's control systems. The Devourers simply integrated the attacking programs into their own networks, becoming smarter and more dangerous. Within 6 hours, half the coalition fleet was gone. Some ships were torn apart by weapons that defied physics, while others simply stopped responding to communications before drifting toward the enemy vessels to be consumed like everything else. Emergency transmissions flooded the subspace channels as outer colonies reported Devourer ships appearing in their systems, each one larger and more capable than the last. On Earth, Admiral Park Minho was in his office reviewing intelligence reports when the priority transmission arrived. The holographic display showed the seal of Fleet Command, followed by words he had waited months to hear. "Authorization granted for Project Indomitable. You have full discretion." He stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 50 years of military service in his bones. Through his office window he could see Lunar Base in the distance, where humanity's greatest creation waited in the shadows of the moon's far side. The project had been so classified that even most of Fleet Command didn't know its true capabilities. "Captain Kim Ji-won, report to my office immediately," he spoke into his communicator. Kim was a veteran of the Mars colonial wars, one of the few humans who understood what it meant to fight when everything went wrong. If anyone could command humanity's secret weapon, it was her. The UES Indomitable began its journey from lunar orbit like a mountain coming to life. 3 kilometers of angular steel and human determination, carrying 50,000 souls toward what would either be humanity's greatest triumph or its final stand against an enemy that had never known defeat. The final coalition defensive line at Kepler Station was falling apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. Admiral Torvak of the Unity Federation pressed his tentacled face against the viewport of his flagship, watching in horror as another coalition cruiser simply vanished into the geometric nightmare that was a Devourer feeding sequence. His own ship, the mighty Harmony of Spheres, had been the pride of the Unity fleet just hours ago. Now it drifted powerless, its energy cores drained by weapons that turned their own power against them. "Sir, the Crystal Shard is reporting complete system failure," his communications officer announced, her voice barely steady. "They're being pulled toward the primary Devourer vessel." Torvak watched through his ship's sensors as the elegant crystalline collective destroyer was slowly torn apart, its beautiful translucent hull cracking like glass as invisible forces ripped it into component atoms. The raw materials flowed in streams of light toward the enemy ship, which pulsed and grew larger with each feeding. The Devourer ships were beyond anything in Coalition tactical databases. They looked like mathematical equations made physical, geometric shapes that shifted and changed according to rules that hurt to think about. Some appeared as massive dodecahedrons covered in flowing patterns of light, while others resembled crystalline spiders with legs that extended into dimensions the human eye couldn't properly process. They moved through space without any visible propulsion, simply appearing where they wanted to be as if distance was merely a suggestion. "Admiral, our main cannon is fully charged," reported his weapons officer, a young Flame Empire lieutenant whose scales had turned pale with fear. "Should we attempt another firing sequence?" Torvak's tentacles writhed in frustration as he considered the futile gesture. They had been firing at the Devourers for 6 hours straight, and every energy blast, every plasma beam, every particle cannon burst had only made the enemy stronger. The machines didn't just adapt to their weapons, they evolved, becoming more efficient with each attack until they could absorb planet-killing energy blasts like gentle sunlight. Fire, he ordered anyway, because sitting there doing nothing felt worse than wasting ammunition. The massive energy cannon that ran the length of his ship charged up with a whine that vibrated through every deck. The weapon was powerful enough to crack small moons, representing the peak of Unity Federation military technology. The beam struck the nearest Devourer ship dead center, a lance of pure energy that should have vaporized anything made of normal matter. Instead, the geometric horror simply absorbed the blast, its surface patterns shifting to accommodate the new energy input. Before their eyes, the enemy vessel grew visibly larger, adding new geometric extensions to its already impossible structure. "We're out of options," Torvak transmitted to the surviving fleet commanders scattered across the battlefield. His voice carried the weight of defeat that every coalition officer was feeling. "The Devourers adapt faster than we can modify our weapons. Every shot we fire makes them stronger." The response channel crackled with voices of desperation. Commander Zailfora of the Void Seekers reported that her phase-shift weapons were being absorbed and integrated into Devourer technology. General Korthak confirmed that even his empire's most exotic thermal weapons were proving useless. Species that had never agreed on anything were united in their helplessness against an enemy that turned their greatest strengths into weaknesses. Then, Captain Lee Sujin's voice cut through the chatter from her badly damaged destroyer. Half of the Starfall's hull had been peeled away like the skin of an orange, but her human crew had somehow kept the ship operational, using emergency power and sheer stubbornness. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Parks. Vessel, they're requesting permission to engage." Torvak's tentacles stopped writhing as he processed this information. The humans had been notably absent from the battle, their primitive ships nowhere to be seen among the coalition forces. Now they wanted to join a fight that had already destroyed the most advanced military technology in known space. One human ship against what destroyed our entire fleet. His voice carried disbelief and bitter humor. "What can they possibly accomplish? Their weapons are centuries behind our technology, and we've already proven that superior firepower only makes these things stronger." The coalition officers shared his skepticism. Some had been present at the council meeting where human military capabilities were thoroughly mocked. Their crude kinetic weapons and primitive armor plating had been laughable compared to energy shields and plasma cannons. If the most advanced alien technology couldn't scratch the Devourers, what hope did human relics have? The answer came without warning, dropping out of hyperspace like a mountain falling from the sky. The UES Indomitable materialized on the B battlefield, and every coalition officer who saw it felt their understanding of human engineering shift fundamentally. This wasn't the primitive destroyer they had expected. This was something that defied their assumptions about what humans could build. The ship was massive beyond reason, 3 kilometers of angular steel and purpose that dwarfed even the largest coalition vessels. Where alien ships were built for elegance and efficiency, the Indomitable was designed for one thing only: war. Its hull was covered in weapon emplacements that jutted out at every angle, creating a silhouette that looked more like a mechanical city than a starship. Armor patches covered sections where battle damage had been repaired, and what appeared to be welding scars crossed the hull like battle wounds that had been worn with pride. Captain Kim Ji-won's voice transmitted to the coalition fleet, calm and professional despite the chaos surrounding them. "This is Captain Kim of the UES Indomitable. Human naval doctrine is simple. We don't build our ships to look pretty or to fight under perfect conditions. We build them to fight when everything goes wrong, when half the systems are down and the hull is breached in a dozen places. Our job isn't to stay pretty, it's to stay fighting." The alien commanders remained skeptical, even as they stared at the human vessel. Admiral Torvak had seen countless ship designs in his long career, but nothing quite like this. The Indomitable looked like it had been built by engineers who expected everything to break and had designed accordingly. Redundant systems were visible even from the outside, with backup weapon mounts and emergency repair equipment mounted on the hull itself. The first Devourer ship approached the human vessel with the same confidence it had shown against Coalition forces. The geometric horror had grown to enormous size by feeding on alien energy weapons, and its adaptive systems were primed to absorb whatever primitive attacks this newcomer might offer. Its flowing surface patterns shifted in anticipation, ready to integrate new energy sources into its ever-expanding structure. What happened next would change every alien's understanding of human warfare forever. The Indomitable opened fire with a sound that had never been heard in modern space warfare, the deep rhythmic thunder of massive kinetic cannons launching solid projectiles at speeds that bent the laws of physics. Unlike the elegant energy beams that Coalition forces favored, these were chunks of dense metal, accelerated to nearly light speed by magnetic coils that ran the entire length of the ship's hull. The first salvo struck the lead Devourer ship like a cosmic sledgehammer. The geometric horror had been prepared for energy absorption, its adaptive shields configured to drink in plasma beams and particle streams. But solid matter traveling at relativistic speeds was something entirely different. The impact cracked the alien construct's flowing surface patterns, sending fragments of crystalline material spinning away into space. Lieutenant Cho Min-seo monitored his weapons console from the Indomitable's Combat Information Center, a room that looked more like the engine room of an old factory than the bridge of a starship. Banks of mechanical switches and analog gauges surrounded him, backup systems for backup systems in true human fashion. "Direct hit on Target 1, he reported, his voice steady despite the excitement. "Enemy shields are fluctuating." Captain Kim Ji-won stood at the center of the chaos, her experienced eyes taking in dozens of status displays simultaneously. She had fought in the brutal ground campaigns on Mars, where equipment failed constantly, and soldiers learned to improvise, or die. That same philosophy had been built into every system aboard her ship. Good shooting. Maintain firing sequence. The Devourer ship began to adapt, just as it had to every previous weapon used against it. Its surface patterns shifted and flowed, creating new structures designed to deflect solid projectiles. Energy fields appeared around the vessel, attempting to slow incoming rounds to manageable velocities. But the adaptation process took time, and human kinetic weapons were already punching holes in its defenses. "They're reconfiguring," Cho reported as his sensors detected the changes in enemy shield configuration. "Adaptive systems are learning to counter kinetic impacts. Estimated completion in 4 minutes." Most Coalition commanders would have felt despair at this point, knowing their primary weapons were about to become useless. Captain Kim just smiled grimly and reached for a different set of controls. "Switch to nuclear warheads," she ordered, with the same calm tone she might use to request coffee. "Manual targeting, variable yield." The Indomitable's weapon systems transformed before the watching Coalition officers' eyes. Modular mounting, points rotated and reconfigured, swapping out kinetic cannons for nuclear missile launchers in a process that took less than 30 seconds. This wasn't just switching ammunition, it was rebuilding the entire weapons array while in the middle of combat. Nuclear fire bloomed across space as fusion warheads detonated against the Devourer ship's hull. Each explosion was precisely calculated for maximum effect, with yields ranging from tactical nukes that could level cities to strategic weapons capable of cracking continents. The primitive fusion technology that alien species had abandoned millennia ago proved devastatingly effective against enemies designed to absorb directed energy. The Devourer ship reeled under the assault, its geometric perfection marred by the chaotic destruction of nuclear explosions. But even as it took damage, its adaptive systems were working frantically to counter this new threat. Radiation absorption fields began forming around the vessel, designed to contain and process nuclear energy just as it had learned to handle. Energy weapons. Commander Zilphora watched from her crippled vessel in amazement, her partially phased form flickering with excitement. "Their weapon systems are completely modular," she transmitted to Admiral Torvak. "They're rebuilding their entire armament configuration during active combat. I've never seen anything like it. When the Devourers finally adapted to nuclear weapons, developing shields that could contain fusion explosions, the humans simply switched again. Electromagnetic pulse warheads flooded the enemy ship with energy that disrupted its electronic systems. When that stopped working, they fired. Kinetic penetrators designed to punch through armor before detonating inside the target. Each time the Devourer began to develop countermeasures, human engineers manually reconfigured their weapons to exploit different weaknesses. The process was like watching master craftsmen at work. Human crew members moved through the ship's weapon bays with practiced efficiency, swapping out targeting systems, recalibrating power feeds, and even physically rebuilding launcher mechanisms while under fire. Everything was designed to be field serviceable, from the smallest targeting sensor to the massive magnetic coils that launched kinetic rounds. But the Devourers weren't passive targets. As the human ship proved its ability to adapt and change tactics, the enemy vessels began focusing their own adaptive weapons on this new threat. Geometric patterns of destruction reached out from the alien ships, reality-bending attacks that could unmake matter at the quantum level. The Indomitable shuddered under the assault as enemy fire struck its armored hull. Sections of armor plate glowed white-hot and peeled away like burning paper. Hull breaches opened across 3 decks as alien weapons punched through defenses that had been designed to stop conventional attacks. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout the ship as atmosphere vented into space. Any coalition vessel would have been lost at this point. Their elegant designs relied on perfect function. When systems failed, the entire ship became a liability. But the Indomitable had been built according to different principles, and its crew responded to damage the way their ancestors had responded to battle damage on ancient ocean-going warships. Damage control teams, led by Chief Park Yunji, raced through corridors filled with smoke and sparks, carrying cutting torches, metal patches, and portable welding equipment. When a hull breach opened in the port weapons bay, they sealed it with emergency bulkheads and continued fighting from backup positions. When the primary power conduits were severed, they rerouted electricity through maintenance channels that most ship designers would have considered inadequate. "Hull breaches on decks 7, 12, and 15, reported the damage control officer, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "Emergency repairs in progress. We're maintaining structural integrity." Admiral Torvak could barely believe what his sensors were showing him. The human ship had taken damage that would have destroyed any coalition vessel, yet it continued fighting with seemingly undiminished effectiveness. Sections of hull that had been torn away were being rebuilt in real time by fabrication units. That had been built into the ship's structure. "Impossible," he whispered, as he watched humans literally rebuilding their ship during battle. "No vessel can function with that level of damage. Their entire port side is gone." The Indomitable's fabrication bays were working overtime, automated systems producing replacement armor plates, weapon components, and structural elements even as the battle raged around them. When a missile launcher was destroyed by enemy fire, a new one was assembled and installed within minutes. When armor plating was blown away, fresh plates were welded into place by crew members working in vacuum suits. This was human engineering philosophy made manifest. The idea that everything would eventually break, and when it did, you fixed it, and kept fighting. The space around Kepler Station had become a graveyard of twisted metal and broken dreams. Devourer ships drifted through the debris field like geometric vultures, feeding on the remains of coalition vessels that had once been the pride of their respective fleets. But the worst was yet to come. A massive distortion appeared in space, reality itself seeming to tear open like fabric being ripped apart. What emerged from that wound in the universe defied description. The Devourer mothership, a construct so large it had its own gravitational field. The thing was easily 50 kilometers across, a nightmare of impossible angles and flowing surfaces that had been built from the consumed remains of entire solar systems. Captain Kim Ji-won felt the blood drain from her face as her sensors tried to process what they were seeing. The mothership wasn't just big. It was actively growing, its surface crawling with construction activity as it incorporated debris from the recent battle into its own structure. Entire sections of Coalition ships were being broken down and rebuilt into new geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Captain, that thing is reading as having the mass of a small moon," reported Lieutenant Cho Min-seo, his voice barely steady. "Its energy output is off our scales. I'm detecting at least 50 different types of weapons systems, most of which don't match anything in our databases." Through the bridge's reinforced viewports, Kim could see the mothership's surface, rippling with activity. Smaller Devourer ships were docking with it constantly, transferring resources and information in a process that made the entire construct smarter and more dangerous with each passing moment. This wasn't just a ship. It was the accumulated intelligence and resources of a machine civilization that had been consuming galaxies for millions of years. The Coalition fleet was in complete disarray. Most ships were either destroyed or so heavily damaged they could barely maintain life support. Admiral Torvak's flagship drifted powerlessly, its elegant hull cracked open like an egg. The few remaining vessels were scattered across the battlefield, their crews paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of what they faced. Captain Kim made a decision that would echo through galactic history. She opened a channel to all surviving Coalition ships, her voice cutting through the chaos and despair like a blade through silk. "All ships, fall back to minimum safe distance. Repeat, all vessels maintain at least 100 kilometers from the target area. We're going to finish this." "Captain Kim, that's suicide," Admiral Torvak's voice crackled over the comm system. "Your ship has already taken massive damage. Even at full strength, you couldn't penetrate that thing's defenses." Kim looked around her bridge, taking in the faces of her crew. They were battered, exhausted, and facing impossible odds, but she saw no fear in their eyes, only determination. These were people who had volunteered for humanity's most dangerous mission, knowing they might never return home. "Admiral, with respect, you still don't understand how human ships work. We weren't built to run from fights we can't win." Sikum, indomitable, turned toward the mothership like a knight charging a dragon. Its hull was scarred and patched, with entire sections blown away by enemy fire, but its engines burned steady and true. Every weapon system that still functioned opened fire simultaneously, filling space with kinetic rounds, nuclear warheads, and electromagnetic pulses in a display of firepower that would have impressed even the most advanced Coalition fleet. The mothership absorbed it all. Every projectile, every explosion, every joule of energy was processed and integrated into its growing mass. The thing actually grew larger as the human ship attacked it, new geometric sections blooming from its surface like metallic flowers. Defensive systems that had never been seen before flickered to life, creating barriers that turned nuclear fire into gentle light. "Captain, main weapons are offline," Lieutenant Cho reported as another series of explosions rocked the bridge. Sparks showered from damaged control panels, while emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the smoke-filled command center. "Hull breaches on 47 decks. We're down to emergency power only." The ship's superstructure groaned under the stress of battle damage that would have broken any other vessel in half. Entire sections of the hull had been peeled away like the skin of an orange, exposing the ship's internal framework to the vacuum of space. Yet somehow the Indomitable kept fighting, its crew working frantically to maintain systems that should have failed hours ago. Captain Kim stood amid the smoke and sparks of her damaged bridge, her uniform torn and her face streaked with soot. Around her, control stations flickered with dying power, while crew members struggled to maintain basic life support. The main display screen showed the mothership growing ever larger as it fed on their attacks, its surface now covering half their field of view. "Engine room, give me everything you have," she ordered over the internal comm system. "I don't care if you have to shovel coal into the fusion reactor. I need maximum power to the engines." Chief Engineer Park Donghae's voice came, back through static and interference. "Captain, we're already running at 120% of rated capacity. Any more and we'll lose containment." "Then lose containment," Kim replied calmly. "Navigation, plot a ramming course. Target the geometric center of the mothership's primary structure." The bridge fell silent, except for the sounds of sparking, electronics and distant explosions. Every crew member understood what their captain was ordering. a suicide run against an enemy that had already proven itself immune to conventional weapons. But nobody questioned the order. They had all sworn, an oath to protect humanity and the Coalition, no matter the cost. "Course plotted, Captain," reported the navigation officer, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "All remaining nuclear warheads are armed and ready for proximity detonation." The Coalition fleet watched in stunned silence as the battered human warship accelerated directly toward the enemy mothership. The Indomitable was dying, atmosphere venting from dozens of hull breaches, entire sections of the ship dark and lifeless. But it still moved with purpose and determination. Its remaining engines burned brighter than stars as the crew pushed them far beyond safe operating limits. "For humanity," Captain Kim whispered, as the Indomitable struck the Devourer mothership at full speed, its hull crumpling like paper as it penetrated the enemy's outer defenses. In that moment, every nuclear warhead aboard the ship detonated simultaneously, along with the ship's fusion reactors and antimatter storage units. The explosion lit up the entire star system like a second sun being born. The blast wave expanded, outward at a significant fraction of light speed, carrying with it the atomized remains of both vessels. When the nuclear fire finally faded and the Coalition fleet's sensors could function again, they found empty space where the mothership had been. But impossibly, miraculously, the Indomitable was still there. The ship drifted in space like a broken cathedral, its hull breached in 1,000 places, and its superstructure twisted into impossible shapes. Yet somehow, incredibly, it was still transmitting on emergency frequencies. Life support was functioning in isolated sections. Human voices could be heard over the comm channels. Damage control teams still working to seal breaches and restore power. Admiral Torvak opened a channel to the human vessel, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. "Captain Kim, your ship should have been completely destroyed in that impact. Nothing could survive that kind of explosion at ground zero." From somewhere deep in the smoke-filled wreckage of the Indomitable's bridge, Kim's voice came back steady and proud. "Admiral, you still don't understand human engineering. We don't build ships to survive battles or to look pretty in fleet reviews. We build them to win battles no matter what it costs us. That's what victory looks like." 3 days later, the Galactic Defense Coalition held an emergency session at Nexus Prime, the chamber that had once echoed with laughter at human military capabilities now fell silent as Admiral Park Min-ho stood before the assembled delegates. The formal request was simple and unprecedented. The Coalition wanted copies of all human naval doctrine manuals, engineering specifications, and tactical training programs. Admiral Park smiled as he approved construction orders for 12 new Indomitable-class vessels, each one a testament to the human philosophy that sometimes the old ways work best. The galaxy had learned that there was more than one path to military superiority, and humanity's path was forged in steel, determination, and the unshakable belief that any fight worth starting was worth finishing. The end,